A lab technician in São Paulo noticed his food delivery orders were always wrong. It wasn't until he analyzed the strange drink left at his door that he realized it wasn't a mistake, but a chilling message from someone seeking revenge. Welcome to Echoed Chronicles. For this tale, we travel to the sprawling, anonymous streets of Brazil, where a simple mistake has consequences that are delivered right to your door. The drone of 1,000 motorbikes was the lullaby of São Paulo. From his apartment on the 14th floor, Mateus Almeida barely noticed it anymore. It was just part of the city's vast, breathing ecosystem, a constant thrum of life that faded into the background like the hum of his own refrigerator. He was a lab technician at a large public hospital, a man who spent his days in a world of sterile precision, peering at blood samples through a microscope, searching for the microscopic imperfections that signaled disease. His life was governed by data, by process, by a quiet and meticulous order. Tonight, that order had been thrown into chaos by a faulty centrifuge that had set his team back by 3 hours. He'd arrived home long after the sun had been swallowed by the city's concrete canyons, his mind still buzzing with the day's frustrations. The thought of cooking was unbearable. His fridge contained little more than eggs and a bottle of pimenta from his mother. He collapsed onto his sofa, the worn leather groaning in protest, and pulled out his phone. The familiar red icon of the iFood app was his beacon of hope. He scrolled past the usual suggestions, his thumb swiping through a universe of pizza, sushi, and burgers. He settled on a small, family-run place that specialized in traditional buy-in food, ordering a simple maquica and a can of Guarana Antarctica, the fizzy, fruity soda that tasted like home. The app assigned a driver named Jonas. His small, smiling profile picture a stark contrast to Mateus's own exhaustion. He watched the tiny motorbike icon crawl across the digital map of the city, navigating the labyrinthine streets of the Pinheiros district. 40 minutes later, the intercom buzzed. The delivery man was a blur of a red jacket and a helmet, the transaction a swift, impersonal exchange of a thermal bag for a quick obrigado. Mateus locked his door, the 3 deadbolts sliding home with a satisfying thud, and carried the food to his small kitchen table. The maquica was hot and fragrant with coconut milk and dend oil. He unpacked the container, his stomach rumbling in anticipation. Then he saw the drink. It wasn't his guarana. Instead, nestled beside the food container, was a small, unlabeled glass bottle filled with a cloudy, yellowish liquid. It looked like some kind of homemade juice. There was no brand, no writing, just a simple metal cap. Mateus frowned. A simple mistake. The restaurant must have run out of the soda and substituted it with whatever they had on hand. It was annoying, but not unheard of. He tossed the strange bottle into the bin, annoyed at the thought of paying for something he didn't want, and made a mental note to leave a 2-star review for the restaurant. He ate his maquica in the quiet of his apartment, the distant symphony of the motorbikes playing on. A week later, after another grueling shift, Mateus found himself in the same predicament. Too tired to cook, too hungry to sleep. He opened the iFood app again, making sure to choose a different restaurant this time, a well-reviewed pizzeria 2 neighborhoods over. He ordered a simple calabresa pizza and, once again, a can of Guarana Antarctica. The app assigned a driver named Ricardo. The delivery was even quicker this time. The exchange at the door was another brief, anonymous encounter. Back in his kitchen, Mateus opened the pizza box, the familiar aroma of oregano and sausage filling the small space. He reached into the bag for his drink. His hand stopped. His blood ran cold. It wasn't Guarana. It was another small, unlabeled glass bottle, identical to the first, filled with the same cloudy, yellowish juice. He stared at it, his mind refusing to process what he was seeing. This wasn't a mistake. Not again. Two different restaurants, two different drivers, miles apart in one of the biggest cities in the world. And yet, the same bizarre, specific substitution had been made. It was impossible. It was a statistical anomaly so profound it felt like a message. Someone knew what he was ordering, and someone, somewhere in the vast, anonymous machinery of the city, was deliberately changing it. Mateus stood frozen in his kitchen, the open pizza box releasing steam into the cool, still air. The small, unlabeled bottle sat on his countertop, a defiant anomaly. It wasn't just a bottle of juice. It was a message. It was a quiet, impossible statement that someone had access to the most mundane details of his life. His scientific mind rejected the supernatural immediately. There had to be a logical explanation, a connection he was missing. He pulled out his phone, his fingers swiping through the iFood app with a newfound urgency. He brought up his order history. Order 1. Makika from Sabor de Bahia. Driver Jonas. Order 2. Pizza from Forneria Paulista. Driver Ricardo. He tapped on the restaurant profiles. They were in different parts of the city with no shared ownership he could see. He looked at the driver profiles. Jonas and Ricardo. Two different men, two different smiling photos, two different ratings. There was no link. No conceivable way for a pizzeria in Vila Madalena to know about a mistake made by a buy-in restaurant in Pinheiros a week earlier. The only common denominator was him, the app, the delivery address. A cold dread began to seep into the edges of his analytical thoughts. This wasn't a restaurant issue. This was targeted. Someone was manipulating the system, intercepting his orders. Not to steal his money, not to harm him, but to do this. To replace his simple can of soda with this strange, homemade concoction. The sheer pointlessness of the act was what made it so terrifying. It was a display of power, a violation for the sake of violation. He looked at the bottle. He had thrown the first one away without a second thought, dismissing it as trash. He would not make that mistake again. This was evidence. Evidence of what he didn't know, but it was the only tangible link he had to the invisible hand manipulating his life. He didn't eat the pizza. His appetite had vanished, replaced by a hollow knot of anxiety in his stomach. He didn't touch the bottle either. He slid it carefully to the back of the countertop, as if it were a venomous creature that might strike. The city outside his window, once a comforting backdrop, now felt menacing. Every one of the 1,000 motorbike engines he heard could be the one. Ricardo, Jonas, or someone else entirely. The anonymity that had once provided him with a sense of privacy now felt like a perfect camouflage for a predator. In a city of 12 million people, he had been singled out. That night, sleep offered no escape. His dreams were filled with endless corridors of identical doors and the sound of a motorbike engine that was always just around the corner. The next morning, driven by a need to reclaim some semblance of control, he decided to act. He was a man of science. The bottle contained a liquid. That liquid had properties, could be analyzed. He carefully wrapped the glass bottle in a clean cloth, placed it in a small, insulated lunch bag, and took it with him to the hospital. He would break every rule of his lab, but he had to know. He had to know what was in the juice that was not juice, what was in the message that was not a message. He needed data because data was the only thing that had ever made sense in his orderly world, and his world was beginning to make no sense at all. The hospital lab after hours was a different world. The daytime hustle of technicians and doctors was replaced by the low, steady hum of refrigeration units and the rhythmic beep of machines in standby mode. It was usually a place of comfort for Mateus, a sanctuary of logic and process. Tonight, it felt like a crime scene, and he was the one committing the transgression. He waited until his colleagues had all left, his heart thumping a nervous rhythm against his ribs. He felt a profound sense of professional shame using a multimillion real gas chromatography mass spectrometry machine, a device meant to diagnose critical illnesses, to analyze what was probably just cheap, sugary juice. But the gnawing uncertainty, the feeling of being watched and manipulated, was a sickness of its own, and this was the only cure he could imagine. He unwrapped the bottle. Under the harsh, sterile lights of the lab, the cloudy liquid looked even more unappetizing. He drew a small, precise sample with a pipette, his hand steady despite the tremor of adrenaline inside him. He prepared the sample for the machine with the practiced efficiency of 1,000 other analyses, but his mind was far from routine. He was acutely aware of the security cameras, the log files, the digital trail he was creating. If anyone were to ask, what would he say? That he was testing a suspicious beverage from a food delivery app? They would think he was insane. He loaded the sample into the mass spectrometer. The machine whirred to life, its internal mechanisms beginning the delicate process of separating, ionizing, and identifying every single molecule in the liquid. The process was automated, precise, and utterly indifferent to the turmoil in his heart. All he could do now was wait. He sat at his terminal, watching the progress bar on the screen, the silence of the lab pressing in on him. Every soft beep from a neighboring machine sounded like an alarm. Every shadow in the long corridor outside seemed to stretch and move. He was a scientist, a man of empirical evidence, yet he felt like a character in a ghost story, waiting for the inevitable scare. After what felt like an eternity, the analysis was complete. A notification pinged softly on his screen. The results populated, a long list of identified chemical compounds and their relative abundance. He scrolled through the data, his eyes scanning for anything out of the ordinary. Fructose, sucrose, citric acid, ascorbic acid, potassium, all the expected components of a simple fruit juice, likely passion fruit or pineapple. He felt a wave of foolish relief. It was just juice. He was losing his mind, spooked by a simple restaurant error. He was about to close the file, to scrub the data and forget this whole paranoid episode, when he saw it. Near the bottom of the list, an outlier. A compound present in a concentration far too high to be a natural trace element. Lactulose. Matthias stared at the word, his blood running cold for the second time in as many days. Lactulose was not a component of any fruit. It was a synthetic, non-absorbable sugar, a potent osmotic laxative used clinically to treat severe constipation and high blood ammonia levels in patients with liver disease. It was a manufactured, medical-grade substance, a substance that would be readily available in any hospital pharmacy, a substance that he, as a lab technician, would occasionally see referenced in patient charts. The relief he had felt moments before curdled into a new, more profound horror. This wasn't a random act. It wasn't a simple prank. This was a message sent by someone who understood the clinical world. Someone who knew that this specific, tasteless compound would be undetectable to a layperson but glaringly obvious to a lab analysis. The bottle wasn't a threat of simple poisoning. It was something far more intimate and terrifying. It was a demonstration of knowledge. The sender knew he was a lab technician. They knew he had access to a machine like this. They had sent him a riddle, confident that he had the tools to solve it. The message was clear. I am like you. I am in your world. I can reach into your life and change the smallest detail. And I can do it with the precision of a scientist. The sterile safety of his lab evaporated, leaving him exposed and vulnerable in the one place he had always felt in control. The bottle was not a weapon, but a signature, and he had no idea whose it was. The hum of the spectrometer faded into a dull roar in his ears. Lactulose. The word was a key, unlocking a new, more terrifying level of the game. This wasn't about a random driver or a restaurant mix-up. This was about the hospital. The person tormenting him was here, inside these walls, walking the same corridors, breathing the same filtered air. Who? A doctor? A pharmacist? Another technician? The possibilities were a dizzying, horrifying vortex. He looked at the machine, at the damning data on his screen. He was the one who had broken the rules, who had run an unauthorized test. He had the proof, but revealing it would mean exposing his own misconduct, potentially costing him his job and his credibility. He was trapped in a prison of his own making, armed with a truth he couldn't share. He hastily deleted the test results from the terminal, scrubbing the local drive, but he knew the machine's central server would retain a log. It was a digital ghost he couldn't erase. He cleaned his station with frantic precision, leaving no physical trace of the illicit analysis. He walked out of the lab, the small glass bottle, now feeling radioactive, heavy in his pocket. The next few days at work were a special kind of hell. Every interaction was colored by suspicion. He watched his colleagues with a guarded, paranoid gaze. Did the quiet pharmacist on the third floor have a strange sense of humor? Did the new resident in gastroenterology hold a grudge against him for a mislabeled sample? Every smile seemed like a mask, every casual conversation a potential interrogation. The hospital, once a place of routine, had become a house of mirrors where every reflection was a potential suspect. He stopped ordering food. He cooked his own simple meals, eggs and rice, his appetite still a ghost of what it once was. He needed to eliminate the variable to cut off the delivery vector. For a week, nothing happened. The silence was absolute. No strange substitutions, no impossible deliveries. A part of him began to hope that it was over, that the tormentor, denied their medium, had given up. It was on a Saturday afternoon that the next move was made. He was at home, the relentless rain of a São Paulo winter drumming against his window, when his phone buzzed. It was a message from a number he didn't recognize. There were no words. It was just a picture. It was a photograph of his own apartment building, taken from the street below, looking up at his specific window. But the photo wasn't taken from a normal perspective. It was taken from the back of a motorbike, the edge of a red iFood thermal delivery bag visible in the lower corner of the frame. Mateus stared at the image, his heart seizing in his chest. They hadn't given up. They had escalated. They had moved from the abstract world of online orders to the physical reality of his home. The delivery app was never the point. It was just a tool. The real message was about access, about proximity. He ran to the window, his breath fogging the cold glass. He looked down at the street 14 floors below. The rain was falling in gray, windswept sheets. The traffic was a crawl of red tail lights. There were dozens of motorbikes, their riders anonymous figures in helmets and rain ponchos. Any one of them could be the one. He was looking for a needle in a haystack of needles. Then his phone buzzed again. Another message from the same number. This time it was a single sentence, written in perfect, chilling Portuguese. Echo que você esqueceu de pedir sua bebida. I think you forgot to order your drink. He dropped the phone as if it had burned him. The screen cracked against the floor. The message was a declaration. The game wasn't over, and the person playing it was outside his building right now, waiting in the rain. The cracked phone lay on the floor, the text message glowing like a toxic ember in the dim light of the apartment. Mateus felt a profound, paralyzing fear. The city's endless drone of motorbikes was no longer a lullaby. It was the sound of a predator circling. He was being hunted, and the hunter was at his doorstep. He backed away from the window, his heart hammering against his ribs. He couldn't call the police. Someone sent me a picture of my own building. They would dismiss it as a prank, a wrong number. He was alone with this, trapped 14 floors above a city that had turned against him. For an hour, he sat in silence, the terror giving way to a cold, familiar anger. He was a scientist, a man of logic. Fear was a chemical reaction, and panic was a failure of process. This entire ordeal was a series of inputs, a chain of causality. He just had to find the source. The tormentor was clinical, precise. The use of lactulose was not random. It was a clue aimed at a lab technician. It spoke of liver disease, of ammonia levels. It spoke the language of his own profession. The motive had to be there, in his work. With a surge of desperate energy, Matthias grabbed his laptop and logged into the hospital's remote server. He navigated to the archival database for his own lab, his own cases. He began to search, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He cross-referenced every patient file involving liver function tests from the past year with his own work logs. He was looking for a mistake. His mistake. He found it in a file dated 6 months prior. A patient named Antonio Silva, admitted with jaundice and confusion. Matthias had run the initial blood panel. The results he'd certified had shown elevated liver enzymes, but nothing immediately critical. There was a note in the digital log from the ER doctor, questioning the ammonia level, suggesting a retest. The retest had been delayed by a shift change. By the time the new results came back, confirming acute liver failure, it was too late. Antonio Silva had died 3 days later. The internal review had cited systemic delays. No single person was blamed. But Matthias knew, looking at the raw data now, that his initial test had been flawed. A calibration error he should have caught. His mistake hadn't killed the man, but it had stolen the crucial hours that might have saved him. His blood ran cold. He pulled up Antonio Silva's file. Next of kin, a son. Jonas Silva. Matthias's breath hitched. Jonas, the name of the first driver. He typed the name into the hospital's internal staff directory. Profile appeared. Jonas Silva. Position, Central Supply Clerk. The department that handled logistics, supplies, pharmacy orders. And the photograph on the profile was the same smiling man from the iFood app. Everything crashed into place. The access to lactulose. The knowledge of the hospital's inner workings. The methodical, soul-crushing precision of the torment. Jonas wasn't a random monster. He was a son. And he was holding Matthias accountable in the only way he could, by turning Matthias's own clinical detachment back on him, by making him feel the same powerless, creeping dread his father must have felt. Matthias knew the game had to end. It would not end with the police or with violence. It had to end with an acknowledgement, an admission of the truth that had been buried in the data. With hands that were surprisingly steady, he picked up his phone. He opened the iFood app one last time. He ordered a single pão de queijo and a can of guarana antarctica from the nearest bakery. He paid and waited. A driver was assigned. The name was generic, Lucas, but the profile picture was the smiling face of Jonas Silva. A final, deliberate taunt. The intercom buzzed. Matthias took a deep breath and went downstairs, not to the door of his apartment, but out to the street. The rain had stopped. A lone delivery motorbike was parked at the curb. The driver, helmet still on, held out a small paper bag. Matthias did not take it. He looked directly at the man's darkened visor. "Jonas," he said, his voice quiet but clear over the city's hum. "Eu sinto muito, pelo seu pai. I am sorry. For your father." The figure on the bike went rigid. For a long, silent moment he did not move. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he reached up and lifted the visor. It was him, Jonas. His face was thin, worn with grief, and there was no smile. His eyes were hollowed out by a pain Matthias was only just beginning to understand. Jonas did not say a word. He simply held Mateus's gaze for a second, a silent confirmation passing between them. The message had been received. The debt had been paid in sleepless nights and paralyzing fear. He lowered his visor, turned the bike on, and merged into the endless river of São Paulo traffic, disappearing forever. Mateus stood on the pavement, the small paper bag still in the man's outstretched hand as he drove away. He was alone. He went back to his apartment. He didn't know if the terror was truly over, but as he locked his door, he knew that the sterile, orderly world he had once inhabited was gone. He was no longer just a scientist who observed imperfections under a microscope. He was one of them, a flawed man, living with the ghost of his own mistake.